In this lecture, we're going to turn to foreign problems, and in particular, the problem of Jugurtha and Numidia at the end of the 2nd century BC. We'll begin by looking at the relationship between Rome and Numidia in the aftermath of the Punic Wars, and then look at Jugurtha's revolt and Rome's attempt to intervene. So Numidia was the territory west of Carthage, and you should remember that Massinissa was allied with the Romans, and he was a key to the defeat of Carthage in the Second Punic War. It was Massinissa that provided a number of allied troops, but also sort of information about how best to defeat the Carthaginian forces. And as a reward for this victory, and as a reward for his support of the Romans, Massinissa was granted all of the territory all the way east to Mauritania. So not Carthage, but all of Numidia and all the way to Mauritania. So you can see on the map where this is marked that this significantly extended the territory that Massinissa and the Numidians controlled. Here we have, as an example of the ongoing relations between Rome and Numidia, and in particular Massinissa, a representation of Scipio Aemilianus at Massinissa's deathbed. And remember, Aemilianus is the victorious general in the Third Punic War. And so here he is comforting poor Massinissa as he's about to leave with these Roman soldiers and also the Numidians surrounding him. And again, representative of the ongoing relationship, that this relationship did not end with the end of the Punic Wars. When Massinissa dies, it's his son Micipsa who succeeds him as the king of Numidia and as the person who controls now this vast empire. Micipsa has two sons, Adherbal and Hiempsal. He also adopts an illegitimate grandson by the name of Jugurtha. And he's uncertain about Jugurtha, so he recognizes that Jugurtha is of his blood to an extent. He's the son of a prostitute, and is uncertain, though, whether he wants to fully welcome Jugurtha as a son, on the same level as Adherbal and Hiempsal. So what Micipsa does is he actually sends Jugurtha to Spain to fight with the Roman army, and in some sense to become acculturated, to learn to become a man. We're told by Sallust that, in fact, what Micipsa hoped was that Jugurtha would be killed in action, and that this would just remove any kind of discussion about what role Jugurtha should play in the succession of Micipsa. In fact, what happens when Jugurtha goes off to Spain to fight as an allied force with the Roman army is he demonstrates his virtue. He impresses the general Scipio Aemilianus to an enormous extent, to the point that Scipio actually comes back and tells Micipsa what a talent Jugurtha is, what virtue he has on the battlefield. So when Micipsa dies in 118 BC, so we're getting to the end of the 2nd century now, and this is the period in Rome where we have a lot of unrest. This is the period where the Gracchi brothers are churning up tensions and, in fact, end up themselves killed internally. So Rome itself is undergoing a lot of transitions. We've talked about the extent to which the 2nd century BC was a time of great transition throughout Italy, but for Romans in particular. And so when we now have the situation in Numidia becoming a little bit unstable, that's an additional source of stress for the Roman government. So when Micipsa dies in 118, he leaves his kingdom to now his 3 sons. So he formally adopts Jugurtha as a full heir, on the basis of Jugurtha's courageous performance in Spain. And on his deathbed, he gives a heartwarming speech. And part of this speech is giving instructions to his 3 heirs about how to manage this vast kingdom of Numidia. He orders them to respect each other and to respect the virtues of what the Romans called amicitia, or friendship. And he asks them to rule in concord, so to rule harmoniously. In other words, to not, as soon as Micipsa is dead, start fighting over territory and fighting over who's going to have more power. Unfortunately, as soon as Micipsa dies, rivalries break out, and one of the reasons for these rivalries, we're told by Sallust, is in fact that Micipsa's native son, his natural son, Hiempsal, is not respectful towards Jugurtha, and Jugurtha responds with a bad temper. He doesn't respond moderately, and this will be something that is a problem for him throughout the rest of his life. But Jugurtha responds in an immoderate fashion and immediately has Hiempsal murdered. He creates a conspiracy and arranges for the murder of Hiempsal. So that takes Hiempsal out of the equation, but also shows the immediate violation of Micipsa's wishes for his heirs. Jugurtha also has the other son, Adherbal, so his adopted brother Adherbal, banished, and Jugurtha himself tries to seize full control of Numidia. The extent to which Jugurtha had always planned this is unclear. We can't go back in our time machine and interview him. It certainly seems possible that that was the plan. It's also possible that he realizes that he's not going to be respected by his adopted brothers, and he takes the stance of the aggressor in this, in trying to settle the dispute. And here you have a tomb. This tomb is an example of the elaborate kind of royal tomb that one would find in Numidia. It was originally identified as the tomb of Massinissa, but is now thought to be actually the tomb of Micipsa. So doesn't look so impressive now, but enormous, and would have been, again, elaborately decorated with marble, gold, silver, things like that, and would have been an impressive structure. So after Adherbal is banished, and Jugurtha really sets himself up as the ruler of Numidia, as the sole successor of Micipsa, Adherbal goes to Rome to seek assistance. His father had long had a good relationship with Rome that was a mutually beneficial relationship that was described as a political amicitia. So it's natural then that Adherbal seeks the help of Rome. He asks Rome to intervene in what is basically a dispute between these two brothers, one adopted. Rome, for its part, is eager to protect the stability of its holdings in Africa, in particular Carthage. So it doesn't want to see warfare break out in Numidia. That's going to threaten its holdings in Carthage. It also doesn't want to get drawn into a more serious kind of civil war between Jugurtha and Adherbal. So what it does, it intervenes and divides Numidia. So essentially it acts as a parent between two quarreling siblings and says, Adherbal, you get the east, and Jugurtha, you get the west. The benefits of being assigned the east is just the fact that it was much more developed. It was a richer territory. Jugurtha seems to respect this arrangement. He seems to be afraid enough of Roman intervention at this point in time that he doesn't immediately act. But within a couple of years, he does act. And in 112 BC, Jugurtha invades Adherbal's territory in the east. He has managed to collect his forces. He's got enough military strength to take down Adherbal in something of a surprise attack. He executes Adherbal, but also several of Adherbal's supporters, who include some Italian businessmen. So these citizens of Rome are now executed. This further involves Rome in this problem in Numidia. But at this point in 112 then, Jugurtha has managed to eliminate both of his rivals for the kingship of Numidia. He's had both Adherbal and Hiempsal killed. And on the left-hand side here, this is a portrait on a coin, a visage on a coin showing Jugurtha. In response to Jugurtha's slaughter of these Italian businessmen, as well as his lack of respect for the intervention, the arrangement that Rome made between Jugurtha and Adherbal, Rome sends military forces to Numidia to discipline Jugurtha, to get him in line, to show him not to mess with Rome. Unfortunately, these forces fail. They're simply not capable of fully getting Jugurtha in line. In 111 BC, Jugurtha responds with his own attempts to negotiate a kind of peace settlement with Rome, where Rome would recognize him as the king of Numidia and, in response, withdraw its military forces. So he travels to Rome. He makes payments to various members of the Roman nobility, and this was something in his time in Spain that Jugurtha picked up, we're told, was that at this point the Roman nobility could be bribed. Sallust will talk about this as a sign of the decline in Rome, that basically you have all these members of the nobility that are on the take. When Jugurtha is in Rome, the tribune of one of the tribunes vetoes his opportunity to speak, doesn't let him speak. So, in fact, this trip is for nothing. Jugurtha is never able to present his case in any kind of public forum. And the message is sent pretty clearly to him that Rome is not going to play ball on Jugurtha's terms, that he's going to need to come around to their terms. And in 110 BC, the Senate actually rejects a treaty that a general had negotiated with Jugurtha back in Numidia on the field. So, again, an example where probably this general had been one of these members of the nobility on the take, was willing to do business with Jugurtha and negotiate a settlement that was very favorable to Jugurtha. The Senate is kind of the moral conscience back in Rome and says, this is not appropriate, we're not doing this. And it vetoes this treaty. And this is a good example, as we talked about, where on the one hand, military generals now have the right to negotiate treaties on their own, but those treaties still have to be ratified by the Senate, and the Senate could refuse to ratify the treaty, as it does in the case of 110 with Jugurtha. So finally, after another several years of essentially skirmishes with Jugurtha, where the Roman forces are making no progress whatsoever, finally they start to dig in and make some progress. This happens in large part because Marius is given control. Marius had some good experience in skirmish warfare from Spain. He had done a tour of duty in Spain. And so when he's given control of the Roman forces in Numidia, he's able to exploit that experience. And in 105, he finally arranges for the end of the war. It happens not in a pitched battle. There's no killing of Jugurtha in combat, no noble end for Jugurtha, who had distinguished himself so much as a soldier, but rather it ends when the king of Mauritania, who had been an ally of Jugurtha, a guy named Bacchus, who had been a friend and ally of Jugurtha, decides that he's going to violate the terms of his friendship with Jugurtha and go over to the Roman side. And he hands over Jugurtha, and in return is given part of Numidia. So remember that at this point in time, the Numidian territory stretched all the way to Mauritania, so he's given some territory in the west, and the brother of Jugurtha is given the rest. One of the things that this shows us is that Rome had no interest in, for instance, annexing Numidia. It had a presence in Carthage, but it's not interested in gaining a lot more territory. It's not interested in extending its presence in North Africa. But it does feel like it needs to make sure that the situation is stable. But there's no kind of game plan in play for how to deal with this kind of a situation. So they end up intervening at a relatively early stage and getting drawn into a drawn-out conflict. It's expensive, and it really brings them no gains. It does settle Numidia. Eventually they get somebody who is reasonably well-behaved, that is the brother of Jugurtha, as the king of Numidia. But it doesn't bring any real benefit to Rome itself. And it reveals a weakness that is going to come up over and over again, which is the Senate's inability to manage foreign interventions appropriately and to Rome's benefit. There's not a kind of larger plan or a thoughtful long-term strategy for dealing with these allies. And this becomes a real problem as we get into the 1st century, when issues with allies, and especially misbehaving allies in faraway places, becomes a big issue. Becomes an issue for dealing with Asia Minor in particular, in the Eastern Mediterranean. So the Romans don't really learn a whole lot from this situation, apart from the fact that it's a weakness for them. And in the end, they get Jugurtha, they pacify Numidia, they calm things down, but that's about it, and it costs them a lot of money. And so here we have some images showing the capture and surrender of Jugurtha. So in this image, you have Jugurtha being led in chains. He's being brought up, probably the idea, the person sitting here is in fact Sulla, and we'll talk about the role that Sulla played in the capture of Jugurtha and the way that this eventually comes back to really haunt the relationship between Sulla and Marius. But for now, it's just enough to know that here you have Jugurtha being brought in chains. Interesting that he's captured before he has a chance to commit suicide, and this means then that he can be taken alive to Rome, paraded in Marius' triumph, and then killed. And here we have a coin that is commemorating the capture of Jugurtha and Sulla's role in it. So you have Sulla sitting on the platform, the elevated figure. He's marked by the phalanx going down the side. We'll talk about why Sulla is called phalanx in a subsequent lecture. And Bacchus is raising up the flowers or whatever this offering is. And behind Sulla, you have Jugurtha kneeling as the captive with his head bowed.